This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
The past week, we saw a great deal of headline space being devoted to the so-called Panama Papers scandal. Ito po ay yung bagong leak daw galing sa isang kumpanya based in Panama na maraming kliyente, 12,500 clients and around 2 terabytes of information. Listing down the clients of this financial corporation law firm that provides tax shelters to 12,500 clients nga daw. Ano? And ang unang lumabas po, the first headlines that came out was portraying Putin, the president of Russia, as one of the major names in the list of tax evaders using the shell corporations. When it turns out that Putin is not mentioned at all in the 2 terabytes or so of information. However, sasabihin noon sa report ng mga dyaryo at media, global media, Western media primarily, na yung kaibigan ni Putin. Ay dinagdag pa nila si President Xi Jinping of China. Again, without saying whether Xi Jinping is really mentioned, and mentioning only a brother-in-law and some friends and so on. Nag-respond ang mga critical skeptics dito sa balita, and they said, una-una, Putin is not even in the list. But by association, they try to smear him, si Putin. So, then people notice in the first few days, why is there not a single American name in this? Eventually they have started coming out with the names of the British, Cameron, the Iceland Prime Minister, and so on, and then later on some American names. But it's turning out that this piece of revelation or whistleblowing leak was brought out by the ICIJ, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and now we know that one of the personalities behind funding the ICIJ is George Soros. And if you don't know the implication of the name George Soros, then you don't know what geopolitical intrigue is. He has funded the color revolutions in Ukraine, in many other countries. He has funded the NGOs in Russia to instigate regime change and so on. And so it's the same thing when they target China and Chinese leaders. And this, what I call the weaponization of information. Ito ang nangyayari, ginagamit na sandata nila sa kanilang geopolitical intrigues, and this is part of the information war. And we have thought of, again, our colleague, si Hero Baswani, to help us understand this shell game of tax havens and tax shelter corporations and so on. And also eventually discuss yung anti-money laundering law and case natin with this Bangladesh fund that found its way to the casino bigwigs in Manila. We also have with us Mr. Ferdy Pasion of NotFeel, who can dwell on some of the possible deeper implications of the AMLA case. Is part of this money going to the campaign of some Philippine presidential and other candidates? We will ask Ferdy his suspicions about this. But let's go to Mr. Hiro Vaswani and ask him to help us guide us through this maze of these tax shelters, shell games that is called these financial tax havens. Hiro.
Tom, I think you have to explain to your audience. Firstly, the company involved is a law firm, and it does its business in Panama just like so many offshore law firms in offering services to set up corporations. Even our law firms here offer this kind of services to our wealthy people who need to engage in business overseas, if they want to avoid taxes, etc.
So how does this happen? Let's say I am a Filipino businessman. I have $10 million. I don't want taxed.
Let me give you the simplest explanation of what I know this because I had a very close associate who was in big-time real estate, and his market was basically the Chinese market. If you are a wealthy Chinese businessman or a politician basically who's made money in China, if you want to basically buy an apartment or real estate in the United States, you don't use your real name because you don't want to announce to the sellers who you are or who you represent. So what you do is you go to Panama, Cayman, or whatever, and you buy what is known as a shelf corporation. This corporation basically you buy, and the board of directors and the executives basically become your trustees. And they operate this corporation based on your instructions. And this corporation that has the legal fiction of its own identity can then invest in U.S. stock markets, etc., etc.
Are mutual funds also into this game? Mutual funds?
No.
No, not mutual funds. Money market funds, do they go into
fund
that?
Managers
Fund managers
or asset managers also use this type of vehicle if they want to trade overseas. You have to establish, first and foremost, a corporate identity because you have to house funds. And you work through these offshore banks, etc., to do business. I mean, this is old. The corporations, the East India Trading Company, when they basically moved out of England to establish their trading posts, they set up corporations. And that is the model that is used today in globalization. They set up what is known as a corporate identity in that island or whatever. Today, with the spread of globalization, and you need legal identity. And there are, 20 countries that offer these services, including the U.S.
Yeah.
In fact, they are number 3 in the world in offering this type of shelf corporation.
When I think of hidden funds, hidden wealth and so on, I first think of Switzerland, no? Diba? Then of course I think of Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, which has had so many cases of money laundering.
First, you're talking about a country that specializes in laundry facilities.
Okay, meaning financial laundering.
Financial laundry. That is top of the heap is Switzerland.
So Switzerland. Number
The
2
Isle of
is
Man.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is number 2, but now Hong Kong has become stricter.
Because of the Chinese government.
Exactly. You know, the change in government
That's right,
and all this. Number 3 is the USA.
Well, some say now it is the USA that's number 1, but that's
Well,
another
you have to
discussion.
understand that U.S. tax laws, when it comes to corporates, corporations pay lower taxes because they have so many breaks.
Tax breaks.
tax breaks and all. That's why Warren Buffett said that, you know, his secretary pays more taxes than he does.
Yes, yes.
Because he owns Berkshire Hathaway, which is actually a fund. And they have what you call deferred income status.
Doesn't that already imply that these corporations are the biggest swindlers?
Well, you can ask the American people because that is American tax jurisdiction. Each country has their own tax jurisdiction. And that's why there is so much movement between countries. And that's why I look at Singapore. Singapore is also another country that is known as Switzerland of the East. Why? Because it's an open financial system.
So this company, Mossack Fonseca, involved in this...
It's a law firm.
It's a law firm that offers this service.
Exactly.
They
set up a corporation.
It goes to rich people and say, hey, you can
High
invest.
wealth individuals or other corporate...
you deposit your money. Is that the right term for it? What do you call it? What do you call
put
it?
up a corporation.
Yeah.
You buy a corporation.
You buy a corporation.
And they will set up the documentation. Because it's like flags of convenience. I mean, people don't realize the Philippine government stopped the Chinese
So how do I
vessel.
escape Philippine taxes by doing that?
Well, it's easy because internally we have very weak tax.
No, you pretend to be a foreign corporation. Because foreign corporations are entitled to tax perks, tax privileges, because we want to attract foreign investments. So if you are a Filipino, you put up a corporation somewhere in the British Virgin Islands or the Isle of Man, and recently through the Panama Agreement, the so-called Panama tax haven, through this law firm, you put up a corporation there. It's very hard to see the actual owners. So you have this.
It's like also the corporation,
owners.
the Smartmatic. Smartmatic also has registrations in the Cayman Islands or someplace, and then Dominion in the U.S. and so on.
And then you invest here in the Philippines.
Yeah, but the money you invest, how does the government monitor that?
Not only in the Philippines, but in any place.
Well, we're talking about Filipinos investing abroad.
Investing abroad through these shell companies.
A lot of Filipinos, basically, or the wealthy Filipinos, would like to invest in the States, in the different financial markets.
So when I bring my money and invest in a shell corporation somewhere out there,
you just buy it.
I just buy it.
And then they will work it out for you.
There is no
and you give
tax
them
on me by the Philippine government?
Well,
because it's a foreign corporation.
First and foremost, whether the money is earned legally or illegally is a matter for the Philippines jurisdiction. Okay, that's another matter altogether. The issue is you have institutions abroad for a long time that will facilitate the establishment of a corporate identity for you for whatever purpose you want.
Yeah.
And that is basically how to manage your money. Even David Cameron said his name was there, and he says, look, my father established this trust years ago.
So his father put money in there?
No, bought a shelf corporation for the purpose of managing the assets, his own assets, and establish a trust fund for his kids.
But he admitted that he has interest in that corporation.
Correct.
Yeah,
now our tax laws...
My point lang is, because I know this is very complicated.
And that's how it's done. It's that simple. You can
ordinary
do it.
folk wouldn't understand
No,
it.
because they don't have the money.
Yeah, they don't have the money to do that.
If you are a Filipino citizen, whether your income comes from inside or outside the Philippines, that is subject to Philippine tax.
Yung nga eh. That's what I
So
figured.
in order to escape from that tax, you put up a foreign corporation in which your name may not be even included as one of the incorporators or stockholders.
That was in the old days. Today,
Sige, we'll clarify that.
Excuse me.
Today now.
Today, Filipinos are allowed to invest abroad.
Okay, we know that. That we understand.
Okay.
Even in the old days, Filipinos are allowed to invest abroad, but whatever income you get from there are still subject to Philippine tax.
Okay,
No,
sige.
again, you have tax treaties between countries. Again,
okay.
it's complicated.
Oh.
So you look, today you have Filipinos investing in China, investing in Vietnam, etc., etc. And more often than not, they will use these kind of corporations to establish a different identity from their local identity. It is to basically spread the liabilities, because a corporation is basically limited liability.
I'll try to make the very, very complicated matter to something more chewable. No, all these came about with this transnationalization of trade, globalization in this specific
Open capital
context,
accounts.
in the specific context of today, imposed by the West of liberalization, privatization, deregulation.
And to escape the payment of taxes to independent states.
That's part of the.
So this is tax avoidance, which is legal, as compared to tax evasion, which is illegal.
And you have to look at the problem of the world today. Okay? Unfortunately, we have, under the system of finance, two types of currency, the dollar and the euro. So people basically who want to do business abroad are forced into that.
Yeah, in other words, they're forced to buy dollars to trade.
Or euro, because of the convenience.
But it's mainly the dollar. It's still mainly the dollar.
60-70% the dollar.
Yeah,
So,
and then these tax havens, deal with the dollars. Yeah,
that's why they are tied to banks who do business with these corporations. If you look at asset management, hedge funds, and all, they are all registered in these.
In other words,
domiciles.
The dollarization of world trade is also part of the reason why we are forced into this and we are forced to accept this.
You have to manage your assets and your financial assets in dollars. You have to manage it. Why? You cannot allow cash to sit. You have to find.
You want to earn interest and other ways of
income or whatever. So. Last week, the peso was moving 47, 48. This week, it's moving towards 45. Why? The Federal Reserve said we're not going to increase interest rates. Situation not so good. All of a sudden, money comes back
again,
to the emerging markets.
I'm going to try to simplify it. So since the dollar has become a commodity, it is being played around, traded, speculated upon, and so on.
How do you trade in different locales unless you establish an international identity that is movable?
But this is where nations are at a disadvantage. Because out of 100 million Filipinos, for example, you may have 50,000 who can do this trading.
I'd say
and
in
so
this
on.
country, less than 5,000.
Less than 5,000 people playing the game. And
Why?
these
Because you have
5,000
that kind of money.
And these 5,000 escape maybe hundreds of billions worth of taxes because of this game.
Well, again, if your tax enforcement is weak, your bank administration is weak, these problems become.
But even a strong state like China suffers the same thing.
Well,
diba?
why?
You know why? Because the Americans, for example, in Panama, what agreement created this monster? It's the so-called Panama Agreement, which Hillary Clinton herself supported. So they created this tax haven. So this has a geopolitical aspect to it. In the first place, why when Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks hack into the private and public records, they are considered as criminals. But the hackers of this Fonseca law firm are not being portrayed as criminals. And they are even being portrayed as heroes for exposing Putin and other enemies, so-called enemies of the...
We dealt with the geopolitical motives of this so-called revelation and scandal, which is really no scandal, because tax avoidance is not illegal in the first place.
That's why they call it tax havens.
Oh, that's
and
why.
It's been there for generations.
And the idea that there are tax havens, isn't it a violation already of the old concept that taxes should be paid, government is responsible for taxes so that they can serve the welfare of the people,
yeah,
right?
It's actually to undermine the independent sovereign states in favor of private corporations.
Again, it is the duty and obligation of every state. There was an interview with 4 former members of the Federal Reserve. And the guy asked them point blank, what do we gain from the dollar privilege? Naturally, Bernanke will say, only modestly. Why will he say that? Because the opposite of that is nation states have an obligation just like what China did to take advantage of the dollar situation.
Okay.
What did
it
China do?
What did?
Closed capital accounts.
Mm.
Okay, we will fix and peg our currency and make it weak.
To try to maintain
earn,
control and
maintain
earn from
control.
yeah.
The reason
What's
why
the difference between that and what we do in the Philippines?
we have never been in a position to control anything. You have a weak state.
And so
Lack savings.
we are being drained of a lot of our wealth and resources through this.
Marcos tried to correct the situation, but by putting up the so-called bagong lipunan notes, which is backed up by gold. We don't know where he got his gold, but we all know that the Philippines is rich in gold.
Yeah.
So,
But the Philippines was never able to really exercise capital controls, no? Was it able to for a while? During Garcia's time, the
Again, you have to
Filipino
understand.
first.
during the time of Marcos, when after the assassination of Ninoy, there was some form of
Well, he
capital
did it
control.
through the Binondo Central
Yeah.
Bank, to try to control.
And
First and foremost.
one of the reasons why some people and pundits say that why he was ousted from power was precisely because he was trying to create a currency that is backed up by gold, and he was proposing the creation of an ASEAN currency.
Okay. Anyway, sige, Hero.
First and foremost, the biggest problem we've had since the beginning is every colonizer will always try to limit the amount of economic power that the colony will have. And what do you mean by economic power? You control the surplus. If you do not have much surplus, you cannot rise above your station. In agriculture, if you have very little surplus, you have very little seed to replant.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is where the issue of interest, savings, and all comes as you climb that ladder.
Okay. Well, you see,
The issue of currency and all may be complicated, but it all boils down. The Philippines has never had a surplus of anything. You cannot build without a surplus.
because of our relationship with the
Because
world
we are
power there.
still operating under the same fundamental policy.
But America itself
I-
is a victim of the situation.
I have to bring it to some conclusion now, no, that
So-
is tangible, no. And so, in terms of policy, globalization is part of the problem because you have liberalized your currency. You're not allowed capital controls. You're not allowed
The state is being weakened.
currency value peg and so
You are
on.
allowed to do as you see fit if you've got the political will.
Well, you don't have the political will because your elections are controlled
But I would
also
like to
by external forces.
Comment
No?
on, I would like to
Yeah, 1 minute, yeah.
make it clear that even the United States is a victim of the system. Why? Every time they print, the Federal Reserve Bank prints money, they owe something. That's
Yeah,
why they're
it's
now
it's debt based. But
So-
I think more important is that the biggest global tax evaders are Apple Incorporated, General Electric,
Yeah, because
and so
there
on.
is a
and
US
Western
tax law.
and then
Therefore,
European.
therefore, the United States is not a so-called democracy. It is a corporatocracy. It is for their corporations.
Precisely. So again, the American state itself, the tax laws offer American foreign corporations tax-free status as long as you do not bring that money back
When
into
Kennedy-
the States.
And that is why we have run
Yeah.
out of time for this subject, and that is why we go back to Warren Buffett's statement. He pays less taxes
Then his secretary.
than his secretary.
Now it's not equitable. And when
Okay.
when
And that
We have
is
no
the
more
tax
time.
system.
We have so much more to say, but maybe we can
That
have a
is the
part
tax
2 in the
system in
future.
the US.
Okay. Maraming salamat, Ka-Hero and Ka-Ferdy. Stay on. We'll now talk about the RIP, rest in peace, rule of law in the Philippines. Okay, let's take this break.